confidence comes with experience. And we all have to start somewhere. So it's natural to feel uncertain, or are you ready, or like an imposter. It's really, but over time, as you gain more experience, as you make mistakes and realize you can get through mistakes and learn from them, over time that eases. I read something that I really love about imposter syndrome. It said imposter syndrome reminds you that courage is a choice, and it's a mindset.
Welcome to Corporate Competitor, presented by Forbes Books, the podcast where executives share how the lessons they learned playing sports shaped their leadership. With me for today's episode is Heidi Durflinger, CEO of EF World Journeys, a leader in guided experiential tours for adults. Rooted in small-town Kansas values and shaped by global experience, you'll learn in this conversation why Heidi always leads with empathy. Whether she's running a 75-mile ultramarathon or guiding her team through global expansion, she brings grit and grace to her 2 decades at the company. For our YouTube fans, head over to the comments because I want to hear from you. What's the best leadership lesson you've ever learned from a coach, a mentor, or a boss? Share it with me, and I'd love to share it with others. Now let's dive into our conversation. Heidi, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, John. I'm happy to be here with you.
Well, I'm so excited. I love not just what your company does and what you stand for in that, but also just fascinated by you and your journey. One of the things that stood out to me, your own journey, right, within EF World Journeys, began as an entry-level tour consultant at EF Go Ahead Tours back in 2004. Crazy. You must have started when you were 5. And here you are, 2 decades later, you're in the role of CEO. Tell us about maybe some of the challenges, some of the things that you experienced along that journey that have helped you progress.
It's definitely been a progression, but I was thinking about this, reflecting, and there's 2 moments that stick out in my memory. One was actually a move that I made, a role. I was asked to take over, was a sales director for one team, and was asked to move over and be the sales director for another part of our business. And, at the time I saw it as a lateral move. I was, really eager. I wanted to become the VP of sales, and I saw it as a lateral move. It was hands down the best move I could have made in my career.
So you saw it as a lateral move, and so you didn't want to make it originally?
Yeah, I thought well, I always say yes. This is a lesson during you take the opportunities as they come. So there was never a question of whether or not I was going to take the move. There was just a moment of, okay, is this going to feel the same? And I realized it didn't. It felt very different. And part of that was the way that I was working. I got the advice from the owner to really treat it as my own business. And I, instead of approaching the role as just as a sales director running sales team, I took it really seriously, and it really changed how I approached my job. I'd always worked hard. I'd always lived and breathed the mission. I'd always been thinking of new ideas of how to help us grow. But I approached challenges differently. So, if we were running short on leads, then start cold calling and reaching out to partnerships and organizations, food clubs and travel clubs and cooking schools or alumni associations that could travel with us. Or when I felt like we needed more marketing, I started writing the email campaigns myself. And, when I felt like we needed more product design and innovation, I started working with our operations team to build out our customized tour program. So, I really, instead of just, approaching it as how I'm driving a sales team, I really approached it as how am I driving the business. And it was a game changer in that moment. And we that year grew that division by 50%, myself with the team. And then shortly after that, I got promoted to VP. So it sounds small, but it is a tweak that I notice that, as leaders are growing, and I'm really passionate about development, that mind shift made a big difference. And then the other moment that sticks out, you were saying, moments that were been challenging and that helped me in this journey is when the pandemic started. So I was president of Go Ahead, of EF Go Ahead Tours, which is our division for travelers of all ages, but typically people 35 plus that are looking to go on a tour that blends cultural immersion and learning with exploration. So this could be everything from a safari that I know you mentioned you're interested with your family, to a food and wine tour or a classic tour around Europe. But I was the president of that division when the pandemic started, and it was definitely one of the hardest moments of my career. We had travelers all over the world, and when it was announced that the borders were going to be closing,
Oh my.
and so the team, I was sitting there. I had the television on in the background. I had, one of our senior teams on my phone, the other one on my computer, dialed in, waiting to understand what was going to happen with the borders closing. And so when it was announced that the borders would be closing, we moved quickly. We already had teams that had moved back into the office because, of course, we weren't so savvy that at that point in working from home. And we, within 24 hours, had every single one of our travelers, which there were thousands all over the world, booked on a return flight. And within 72 hours, we had everyone safely home. And
Wow.
throughout the whole pandemic and that moment, and just throughout the whole journey, I was so proud of how we came together. And we went through a ton of change during the pandemic as a travel company that can't help people travel in that moment, and we, trying to figure out how to help our teams stay connected and stay motivated and forward looking, how to connect with our customers. We made wellness calls to our travelers just as check-ins to make sure they, remembered
You
us.
did
And we're
wellness calls to your customers.
wellness calls to our customers. Just, I
Wow.
think sales, the foundation of sales that I learned is it is relationships. And I think leadership is rooted in relationships. It's rooted in, trust and connection and communication. So during that time, our sales team, we repurposed, we made wellness calls just to check in on how our
Mm.
travelers that were doing, how they, doing during that time, and when they got ready to start dreaming and planning for their next trip, that they were thinking of us. We created a program called Tiny Escapes, where we gave a chance for our tour directors and guides and suppliers around the world to connect virtually with our travelers. And you had a little taste of travel from your living room in that moment. And so we had to think really creatively as a travel company of how to navigate. And as the borders opened and closed and reopened again, it was a lot of pivoting, but the foundation of that was this sense of connection and community that we had as a team to support each other during that moment. And I, recognize the importance of really having a North Star, having a goal that you're all trying to work towards, and really, staying connected with each other makes all the difference.
Wow. Must have a North Star, that's for sure, especially if you're gonna travel properly.
Yeah.
Tell me, I want to go back to part of your answer that you on the first of the two, when you said that I always say yes. I want to, there's so many people that are busy calculating, right? Well, I've got a map. I've figured out what it's going to take for me to get from where I am to where I want to be. And that doesn't seem to be on my map. Um, where, where does this idea of always saying yes, where did that come from? Is there somebody that modeled that for you, that you learned the importance of, I love that idea. Take opportunities as they come.
So my mom is, such a role model. She is incredibly hardworking, always supportive. She puts her friends and neighbors and community first. And she always instilled within me when I was growing up that you never regret going for something. It's only or often when you don't that you look back and wish you had.
Mm.
And, she said that on any little decision I was trying to make of whether or not to try something, to go for something, she would always say, you're never going to regret going for it. And so it stuck with me through the years. And sometimes always saying yes can, get me in trouble as well, because then you also need to be planful with your time, which I think is also really critical for me in my role now, especially is, I do always have a plan, and I always am sort of forward looking a few steps ahead. But I also always, I think that actually allows me to leave space for the unexpected and to be able to pivot if I need to, or jump after a new opportunity if I need to. So it's sort of,
Well, the other part of that answer that really struck me, and I want to know
yeah.
because we all talk about this as leaders, right? We
Yeah.
want those who work with us to believe the business is their own. That always sounds really awesome, but the truth is, most of them will at the water cooler remind you or remind probably not you but somebody else, it's not mine, right? It's not my business. I'm not profiting like the people whose business it is. I've talked to lots of people and everybody wants to have their team believe that, but they struggle to get them there.
So there, so EF, we live and breathe our core values.
Right.
And two of them are entrepreneurial spirit and innovation. And there are a couple of others I'm extremely passionate about, such as passion is one of those, and nothing is impossible mindset. But this entrepreneurial spirit and innovation is something we talk about a lot. And, from my start at EF, we talked a lot about what does that actually mean. And I think, the other piece of advice I got early on was that you get out what you put into something.
Hmm.
And for me, that's how I looked at it. How you treat it as your own is, can be as simple. I remember actually our founder and owner saying this once. He would stand in the lobby and see if there was a piece of trash that was on the floor. He would
How many
stand there
people
and
walk
see if
by it?
anybody bothered to stop and pick it up.
Mhm.
And I've always been that person that stops to pick it up. It's sort of I think in the world in general, we all need to support one another. And I think in work, you need to be looking out for one another and be looking out for the good of what we're doing in our company. And it can be as simple as a small piece of trash that's on the ground that you stop to pick up. And so it's about how you're approaching your every single day. If a customer has a challenge you're trying to solve, something that I talk a lot about is, if you're feeling a moment of, you're not sure what to do, pausing and thinking about if this was a family member, how would I
Mhm.
handle the situation? Uh, that can be also seen as if this was my business, how would I handle it? But sometimes when you make it a little personal, if this was a family member, how might I approach solving this? It helps you think about it differently. So, everyone needs to find their lens. For me, I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs, and I had seen my parents own their own business, and I had seen what it meant to own your own business, the hard work that goes in, the level of care that goes in, the consideration that you have for your customers and for your community. So I got it instantly for me when he said, treat this as your own business. It resonated. I paused and thought, yep, just how my mom and dad would do, how they would take care of even the small little things.
Mhm. That leads, I want to ask you, you grew up in small town America, right? Kansas.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that I loved was that your home, we've talked a little bit about your parents already, became kind of your own gateway to the world because they were such active hosts of international exchange students. How does it feel now to kind of be living out their mission, if you will, but it just maybe maybe a little bit of an expanded nature, helping others see the world. And does it ever strike you as kind of that you're in a little bit of a full circle?
Definitely, all the time. There's a term that I love. It's a Japanese term that's called ikigai. I love this term. It's where, passion meets purpose, and where you discovering what brings you joy, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for. It's that merging of, again, passion, profession, purpose comes together. So I found that in this role. I realized it very early on when I started at EF that I had found that. Again, I mentioned our mission, to open the world through education. For me, it spoke to me. And so now I've been on a mission to help as many people as possible travel the world and have impactful experiences because I grew up in a small town in Kansas. It was a small farming community, as two stoplights and the Dairy Queen where I worked. And I didn't know anyone that traveled internationally when I was growing up. And my family didn't. I was the first in my family to get a passport. And this is when I was 16. And it was a result of my parents serendipitously fell into hosting international exchange students. So from the age of, I was around 9, so I was in the 4th grade until I graduated high school, we hosted 9 different students, so for 9 years, and from all over the world. They came from Norway and Sweden and Thailand, Uzbekistan, Ecuador, Italy, Switzerland, truly the whole world coming into my small community. Yeah, it completely changed my perspective on myself and the world. And, I was exposed to new languages and new foods and new traditions around the holidays and learning what their families did. And, I'm still in touch with many of them. One of them was just in Boston. Her husband ran the Boston Marathon recently. So I got a chance to meet her daughter and cheer on her husband at the race. And, but that time in my childhood really changed the way I was thinking about, what my place in the world and what I could do. And it led me to I got a scholarship to volunteer in Mexico for one summer in university. Then I got a scholarship to live in Spain for a year post-university with the Rotary Club. And then when I was in Spain is when I read an ad for EF.
I was going to ask you about that
Yeah.
ad. I love that. I love the ad. Do you love to travel? Are you the organizer of all your friends? What a great ad and what a smart way to immediately
Yeah.
pick up the two major qualities that you needed from somebody to come join the team. Um, uh, but I love that ad, and I love the idea that it drew you in. I want to go back though, real quick,
Yeah.
because so you had these 9 different, guests coming into your home. Was there one of them and something that just it was in that moment when you realized how much bigger the world was and how tiny we are really when we think about where any of us are from, um, compared to the global opportunity that exists out there.
Yeah. I called them sisters. So I have sisters all over the world. And, they call my parents mom and dad. They really were part of the family for us. And I was excited every year having, a new student from a different part of the world come. And, with every student, actually, I have memories. The second student, I would have only been around 10 years old. I remember cooking with her in the kitchen, and she was from Sweden, but her family was Indonesian, and she was cooking this traditional recipe from Indonesia of, it was noodles and all these vegetables and the most amazing tasting soy sauce that her mother had sent to her that I have never been able to find again, but I can still picture the bottle sitting on our shelf. And that for me sparked a love for cooking. And I became very curious about different flavors. And now whenever I travel, my souvenir is a cookbook from wherever I'm going so I can come back home and recreate recipes for friends and family. So, there was something in every student, all 9, that stuck with me and I think shaped me over time. But of course, one of the most important moments was when I was 16 and our exchange student from Italy I'd become good friends with, and she and her family invited me to come stay with her for a month in the summer. And that was when I got my passport, and her family came to visit us in Kansas. And then I flew over on my own. It was the furthest I'd ever flown. I'd only had flown a couple of times in my life before. And I landed in Bologna, Italy.
Mm.
And 16 years old on my own, holding my passport, nervous as I was going through the border control and hearing Italian spoken everywhere. And I can still remember the taste of the, very first piece of Italian, true Italian style pizza and the first gelato I ever had. I love food. I'm a big foodie. I think food helps, is an expression of a culture and brings back memories. So, but those stick out to me. And then spending time with her family and her Italian grandmother in the kitchen and helping her cook and, seeing what she was making. I just realized that, people are both the same and so different. There's so many traditions all over the world and different ways to eat or approach your day to day. But also at the end of the day, it's a family. It's a family that cares about one another. I met her friends and her friends felt like my friends at home. And so it made the world feel both big and small at the same time.
Now we'll get back to the conversation in a moment. But first, do you know how to turn a moment into lasting momentum? That question has been front and center for me over the last 8 years. And in that time, I've interviewed leaders in sports, business, military, and politics to create a model so that you know how to harness momentum to make it your strategic advantage. Now, it's all available. The model and all those interviews are available in my latest book, The New Science of Momentum. Now, if you're serious about sustained success, this book is for you. There's a link in the description to order, and it is available everywhere quality books are sold. My wife and I just did, she was part of a cooking class in Tuscany for a week not long ago, and I was part of the eating class of people. She did her part, I did my part to help her part. But yeah, you're right. It is just in food. People from all around the world were sitting around this table every night talking about what they cooked, what they did, what they experienced. And yes, the mixture of those two things, the culinary and the travel was spectacular. But this ad placed, you talked about, I've read a piece where you talked about feeling the energy of the company the moment you walk through the door for your interview. Tell me about that, because I love a company that actually the energy is felt as you're relaying it right as you walk through the door. And how do you keep that alive after all these years?
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like it was yesterday. It wasn't. It was 20 years ago, but it does.
That's crazy.
Walking in, and I remember seeing people were coming and going. There were suitcases in hand. There were different languages people were speaking in the elevators. Big smiles on everyone's face. You really could feel this energy, and it's just vibrant. This, which is still true at EF today. And I think there's a few things. I mentioned our core values, as our core values at EF are not just something we talk about. It's something that we come back to, and that, when we're hiring, we think about, is this, it's sort of an approach to how you work, having a mindset of nothing is impossible, approaching your work with passion and caring about the work that we're doing and the customers that we're serving, innovating on how we're doing our work so that we continuously evolve and improve our program. So there's something in the way that we embrace our values day to day and how we're working, and also hire for, candidates that are thinking in that way as well. And then at the end of the day, our work, it has a real impact on people's lives. And it's so, when you work at EF, you feel every single day you come across some kind of moment that was meaningful, or I have during my time. And maybe it's because I'm seeking them out all the time as well. But we have such an impact on people's lives. And I think in the world, also helping people gain new perspectives, learning more about the world and themselves through travel, it helps make the world a bit better and makes it a more understanding place when people have. And I think that's something that we really critically need. So it's that magic combination of people that are passionate about the work they do, knowing they're making a real impact on people's lives. And then I think on top of that, it's that enabling people then to live out those values and how they're working. Give people responsibility from day one. Let them sort of be, as a leader, you really need to think about how you're empowering and trusting your team to deliver on your mission. Of course, it starts with purpose and values, and then it's empowering people to live them. And then I see it as, it's my responsibility to live the energy that I want to see running throughout the entire organization. I make it a point. I really try every new group that starts, every new person that starts at EF, I make it a point to meet them and get to know them. And I, hold a Q&A session where they can ask me anything they want to know. And, I want to make sure that I have a connection with everyone that's starting. And, I spend that time on, we're a people-driven organization. And so I want to make sure that I know our teams, and that I also spend a lot of time with our customers too, to make sure I'm knowing our customers. And so I share that just to go back to what you're saying. I think that's how you keep that energy going, is when people know the purpose, the values, they feel accountable and empowered, and then they see other leaders, living that out themselves. That's the secret.
So the leaders living it out themselves really captures me, because, again, our listeners are generally leaders of organizations, and they're all kind of seeking a kind of a tip on how they can be better by listening here. So I take that one to heart, because I love that idea that it's one thing to talk about it, it's a whole nother thing to live it, and we have to, and what they see is what they believe. And
Yeah.
so if you're coaching one of us out here trying to figure out how do we create some level of energy within our own organization that would be reflective of what you're talking about here. Is there something, is there something specific that these folks can do, or that I might imagine to make people feel that same spark?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned, spending time with people. So I think, it starts with relationships and a feeling of connection. So
Mm.
that's foundational. And that's true of the team. And that's also true with our customers. I make it a point to go on one of our tours, or at least a portion of our tours every year. I meet with travelers in person in the office. I join something called conventions, which are these opportunity for group coordinators who organize groups of people to travel with them. We bring them all together in a new place around the world, and I'll spend time with our customers to make sure that I understand what their challenges are, or what they'd like to see us do better, or, why they're choosing us, and what we can do to help, really make the trips even more immersive and experiential, and bring back those ideas and own them, to be able to make sure that they're happening, and working with teams to implement that, no matter if it's sales or engineering or whatever it might be. So then, so people are seeing it firsthand, and my connection and my care over what we're delivering. But then I think when it comes to the team, there's sort of, I read this, I was actually given this book by an incredible mentor of mine at EF when I first became a sales manager. And the title is funny, but it's called Three Signs of a Miserable Job. And so this concept is very simple and really powerful. And it's about the actual opposite of that, of how do you make people
Right,
find joy in what they're doing, or,
right.
recognize their purpose in what they're doing. And the three M's are really, one is to make sure that they know how their work matters, their
Mm.
personal day-to-day work. How does it matter to the team that they're working on, to the business goals and objectives, to the customer that we're, delivering? And then some, most roles that's easy to see, but sometimes people need help making that connection in their everyday. So one is to make sure that they know their work matters. The second is to make sure it's measurable. When you're doing the work, you want to know how you're doing. So there needs to be a way to understand if I'm successful in the role. And then, job satisfaction, recognizing, hey, I'm doing great, or here's where I need to improve. So having it be measurable is the second M. And then the last is making sure that you know that you matter as a person. And that is what I mean by connection. It's, you need to know that you personally, not necessarily your work or your job, but as a person, as an individual coming to work each day, that others care about you, that your manager cares about you, that your teammate sitting next to you cares about you. Some say it's important to have a best friend at work. I think there's something to that. But it's the idea of making sure that you know that you do matter, and that your manager makes sure that you know that your work matters, that you know how you're doing, that it's measurable, and that you personally matter as well.
I'm wondering, you do these Q&As sessions with your team, right? Give me the craziest question you've ever been asked in one of those Q&A sessions.
Oh gosh, craziest question. Well, I'll tell you my hardest one. My hardest one is where's your favorite place to have ever traveled?
Yeah.
That one gets me every single time.
My answer to that is always the last place I went, because doesn't mean every opportunity is great. But what's your answer to that?
My answer is always actually the place I've never been. I love going new places. So usually I love the feeling of being someplace new and out of my comfort zone and feeling like I'm really exploring. And so usually it's like the new place that I'm going is my favorite.
What is the next place?
So,
Give me your new place.
So let's see what's new. I have one. I am traveling this summer. I gifted my niece for her high school and college. I said when she graduates college, she gets the gift to go and travel anywhere in the world that she wants to go. And so she and I are traveling together. We're still deciding, but it looks like it may be South Korea and Japan.
Right.
And I've never been to South Korea, so that'll be a first for me.
Very cool. I love it. So once you get folks through the door, how do you make people stay? We've asked this question several times recently because there's research, abundant research, that shows that one of the biggest pain points for leaders right now is turnover. And, what have you found is the most effective way to keep your team engaged and committed? And maybe with an idea there that we can apply, something that you're doing that we can apply.
Yeah. So what I said before definitely applies with having people stay as well, this idea of your work mattering and you mattering. But I think it's also this, helping people see the success in real stories. And again, it comes back to a North Star, which is your mission, your purpose, your values as an organization. And then, when you can relate that back to how your customer has experienced the product you're delivering or the work that you've done, it sounds simple, but not everyone does that. Sometimes you need to hear it. You need to hear the wins, and especially in moments when it's really tough. Which I know a lot of leaders right now are facing because there's so much uncertainty in the world in this moment right now. And so, I think you've got to celebrate the wins in the good times and in the rough times, and make those tangible with real life stories of how your customer, how you're delivering on your purpose.
And to do that, you have to have a very unique relationship with your customer, because you've got to. It can't be transactional. They can't have paid you and then now it's over. Yeah. You have to stay in touch with them. How do you do that? You're running a worldwide company. You have employees all over How do you stay in touch with customers? I get it during the pandemic when you can make those phone calls because you're not making any other calls. How do you do it in the course of real life?
So, well, we have the benefit, we talk to a lot of our customers every day. So we have a whole sales and service team that's what they're doing, is supporting customers as they're making their plans and then they're departing. So every day, all day, they're talking to travelers. And so often the stories I'll hear from the conversation someone's having about why they're planning a trip or what they loved most about their tour. Social media obviously makes it a lot easier. So I spend time in the evenings and on the weekends reading what our customers are writing. And so we have a Facebook group community where people are sharing.
Just a Facebook community just of your customers? Just
of our customers. Yeah,
we have a EF customers.
That's right. Yeah, the EF Go Ahead Tours, EF Adventures, and EF Ultimate Break, all three of the brands. have a social media community. And for EF Go Ahead Tours, that is Facebook. So it's our customers. We also have one that's for our solo travelers. So we have a whole line of tours that are for travelers that are wanting to travel solo but not alone, so they can go and join others and travel with other individuals. And so I see a lot, both ideas of ways that we can improve and all the things that are special about the trips that we are putting together. That it's tangible. People are sharing real moments. They're showing pictures of maybe a guide or a tour director that I've met through the years that then they're meeting on tour and was really memorable for them, and or a restaurant meal or a cooking class. We also do cooking classes in Tuscany. You mentioned that as well. Or that moment that they saw an elephant for the first time or a giraffe for the first time when they're on safari. And so, social media, of course, makes it a lot easier to connect in that way. And then we have a mobile app that is not just about logistics and preparation. Of course, it makes it easy for travelers when they're getting ready. They can see their flights and their hotels, but there is a community that's in our mobile app where everyone else that's going on your tour will join. And so you can introduce yourself, you meet people
before you even get there.
Before you even get there. So you arrive and, you're excited about who you're going to meet in your trip, and you put up a profile picture and can introduce yourself. You share pictures throughout the whole tour, and then when you get back, can stay in touch. And so I'm still in touch with travelers that I've traveled with many years ago. I'll still see people writing in, posting saying happy holidays to one another, or remembering it was someone's birthday and it was on tour and it's the anniversary of their tour. So they're celebrating that moment. And so it's, travel is very personal. What we sell is something that it's an emotional purchase. It's whether you're celebrating a life moment or getting through a hard time or reconnecting with a loved one, or, just in need of some fun or wanting to learn. So it is a very personal purchase. And so it's important that we hear our customers, connect with our customers, and connect them with each other as well. It's one of the beautiful things about going on a group tour are the friendships that you make throughout the whole trip, and actually over time. We have people who've fallen in love on tour, or they and gotten married later, or ones who have made a best friend and then have gone on for 10 years every year traveling together. It's really beautiful.
Speaking of commitment and the importance of I know you're very committed to running, and you have been your entire life. In fact, in the research we did, we found that you recently completed an ultramarathon in the desert of Spain.
Yes.
74.6 miles. Is that right?
That's right.
Crazy.
Exactly.
What did that experience teach you that you use as a leader?
That was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever done. If anyone listening gets the chance and you're a runner, you should go. It's 120 kilometers, self-supported. You carried a backpack with all your gear. You spent the night in the desert, so 3 nights in the desert under the stars, and carrying your food and your sleeping bag, and it was just really moving. And I think for running in general, I love to run. I've run 5 marathons so far. I love the distance, and I typically, for me, and then I'll relate it back to what you were asking. It's like typically for me, it is the training that I love the most. I like the, having a goal, working towards it, hitting milestones in my training journey, which I loved in this instant. But actually, it was the event itself that was my lasting, most I guess the favorite part of the whole experience, which it's because you are at these camps and you're meeting people from all over the world who are also, doing this both because for many reasons, but they've also worked really hard over the last few months to get there in this moment. And you're running through the night and you're totally exhausted when you get to the finish line. And yet everyone's standing there cheering each other on with like total energy and, mega blisters all over your feet. and, and it's
I
worth
can only
it's
imagine that had to be painful.
absolutely worth it, and so you have this physical challenge and then a big goal. And I think it's true in work as well. It's, that I bring that in with me every day of setting a goal and working towards that goal, and the feeling when you achieve it. And um, yeah, I was thinking about how, like and one good example of this, we just recently launched a new product that I'm really passionate about. It's called EF Adventures,
Uh-huh.
and it's a startup. So, and I think in starting a new business is like running this ultra. It takes really hard work, but it's absolutely worth it. And we set a big vision. Our EF Adventures product is this merging of learning and cultural immersion and travel with active adventure. So you are hiking or biking or e-biking, or kayaking. So it's these different types of activities that you go all over the world to and together with a group. And when we thought of the idea originally to build EF Adventures, from the point of when we started it, it was a little over a year when we launched the product. And it was a work of passion, people coming together who love to be active and who also, love to learn and love to come together with a community. And so it's one example of how, I've sort of taken the lessons that sort of working towards a goal, that I get from running and applied it into work.
Well, what I loved about your answer and was intriguing to me is this idea that the training is what you love the most. Now,
Mhm.
that's not usual. Most
Yeah.
people want to be in the competition. They want the achievement aspect of it. Um, how does that idea of uh, training being meaningful and training, how do you pass that along to your team? How can
Yeah.
I, if I'm trying to because training is where
Yeah.
it's out of the spotlight, but it's where all the good stuff happens. How do you pass that on?
Yeah. So I think of goals at work are similar, right? You need to set. So when I'm training, I have a plan every day. So, and I'm committed to it. So I know today I need to run 5 miles, and tomorrow I need to, do my weight training. So I'm, strength training. And, I need to make sure that I'm eating healthy and getting enough sleep so that I'm ready for the race and I can do the, 20 mile, 75 mile endurance over time.
Mhm.
And work is similar. If you have, when you have a goal that you're trying to reach, um, breaking that down, sometimes it can feel overwhelming. You hear 75 miles and it feels really overwhelming at the beginning. But when you break that down into smaller, bits that you work towards, it becomes achievable. And suddenly you realize in my marathon training, I'll suddenly realize, wow, I just ran 13 miles and I felt fine. And then I ran 15 miles and then I hit 20 and I'm still feeling great. And in work, if you take what you need, that's a big project or something, a major milestone you're trying to hit, and you break it down into smaller bits. And today, this is what I need to do. This is my focus in this moment. And I'll feel accomplished when I've checked that off. And then tomorrow, here's the next plan, or whether you're setting it on a week basis or a month basis, so that when that moment comes for you to turn in the project or hit the deadline, it feels a lot more manageable and you've celebrated wins. It kind of comes back to what I was saying before around, you need to boost yourself, encourage yourself along the journey, just as you would if you were running a race.
Yeah, when you became president of EF Go Ahead in 2014, you had a moment of doubt there, right? In fact, I think you were quoted as saying, "Am I ready for this?" Everyone, all of us have been there, that moment where I can guarantee there isn't a single one of our listeners that can't relate to that idea. But how did you work through that sense of maybe almost imposter syndrome? We've heard the phrase. And what did it teach you about leadership, self-belief?
What I've found is I think it comes down to a bit of confidence, and confidence comes with experience.
Mhm.
And we all have to start somewhere. So it's natural to feel uncertain or are you ready or like an imposter. It's really, but over time, as you gain more experience, as you make mistakes and realize you can get through mistakes and learn from them, it, over time that eases. And I think I read something that I really love about imposter syndrome. It said imposter syndrome reminds you that courage is a choice.
Mm.
And it's a mindset. And and that is how I, in that moment, of being nervous if I can take this on, say, well, no, this is something that, you have to face the tough things. And that's when we grow. When we're out of our comfort zone is when we grow the most. And so you can let that hold you back, or you can have the courage to keep moving forward. And as a leader, I really think actually having, you know, but imposter syndrome is a bit of self-awareness of the things that you don't know. And that actually invites collaboration and inclusivity, and it allows you to be open to other ideas and creates a sense of trust because no one knows everything. And everyone is doing something for the first time at in their career. And so for me, I've actually tried to translate that into, when I'm feeling, because I still feel it from time to time if I'm doing something new, and I will, recognize it and then let those nerves really push me to learn and to grow. And then, to your point, you were saying we don't go through it alone. I think there's, know the people that you that motivate you, that you trust, that you can go to and speak to openly about it, because likely they've also felt that in the moment, and they're going to have some words for you to help encourage you if you're going through a big change.
I love it. Heidi, I feel like I could have this conversation for hours. Maybe one day we'll do it on a trip. But
Would love that.
more than anything, I'm grateful that you gave yourself your energy, your success to us today, and that you were a corporate competitor with us today. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you. I've loved the conversation. I appreciate it. Yeah, I've been enjoying your podcast, listening to your episodes, so it's very inspiring.
I got to tell you, as I prepared to do this outro, I mean, one of the conversations Savannah and I had is about how we might actually apply some of that in our own business. And we're lucky enough; we have a lot of people that buy books off of the website, and but I've never actually reached back out to people after they bought a book and asked, what did you like? What did you learn? What are you going to take away? And so we're making a change. We're going to do that because of Heidi, and I think that's so. The moral of the story is you aren't only reaching out to your customers when you're asking for something. You need to be reaching out when they would least expect it, and it's unbelievably meaningful. And then the last great lesson I loved from her experience preparing for that ultra marathon in Spain. She talked about the marathon was awesome, but she loves the training. Boy, that's a gift too, to be able to love the training. Um, and to do that, she said, if you try to take on a 75-mile run, you might think immediately, I'm out over the edge of my skis. But in this case, you take it on in small bites. You run, you feel like you've achieved that. Now you could do a little bit more. And there's great synergy between that conversation and what she does at work. Um, she talks about setting up smaller goals within a large opportunity, and then celebrating the milestones along the wins of those small goals. Um, Filled with great lessons, filled with great passion. Could almost, as I said, feel it coming with her coming out right through the microphone. She was so energetic, and if you watched it on YouTube, you'd absolutely see the energy she brought to the conversation. I'm better today. Our company is better today because we had this conversation with Heidi. I hope you are too. I appreciate you.